first know there was a problem about water in Flint?
The first time I was briefed was December of 2014. I was briefed on the TTHM issue, the disinfection byproduct issue. My staff have instructions that when there's a significant violation in a system to bring it to my attention, and they briefed me shortly
So you knew
before.
about it in 2014. When did you have your first conversation with Mayor Walling?
My first conversation about TTHM, about the disinfection byproducts, occurred in late February. He requested a drinking water expert in that area, and I supplied him with an expert from the EPA lab in Cincinnati.
So, Mr. Walling, you went on television in July of 2015 and told everybody that it was safe to drink the water. Did you just do that on your own, or who told you that that was a viable thing to say?
The MDEQ had repeatedly provided assurances. We heard over and over again in our technical advisory meetings, discussions with staff, that the water was meeting the standards, that it was safe to drink.
Did you have a discussion with the EPA?
Dr. Hedman and I spoke around that time after the Del Toro memo was provided
What
to
did she
media
say?
in Flint. And it was explained to me that that memo was under review, that the scope of the problem was being assessed. And my understanding at the time was this was limited to very particular cases because of what was there for lead service lines and plumbing in individual houses.
Mr. Edwards, what's your take on that?
Well, the email is very clear from Ms. Hedman that she apologized for Mr. Del Toro's memo, and Mr. Walling asked her if there was anything that should be of concern to Flint residents, and she said, frankly, no.
Ms. Hedman, why'd you do that?
I didn't apologize for the memo. I apologized for taking all day to get back to the mayor, and that is because I was out of the office for a medical procedure.
Okay, so that was one day. So,
and in fact, during the entire time period that Dr. Edwards imagines I was covering up data and silencing scientists, I was actually out of the office. I did not return until July 13th. During that time period, my deputy, Bob Kaplan, who Dr. Edwards describes as one of the good guys, was actually in charge of the office.
So, Mr. Edwards, this memo from Mr. Del Toro is pretty comprehensive, is it not? Does it tackle the issue? Does it inform them as to the health of this water?
Yes, it points out that Flint's not being protected by federal law and that public health is in danger.
When should that information have been released?
Had EPA just stayed silent and not apologized for the memo to Mr. Walling and told Mr. Walling that Mr. Del Toro was accurate in what he said, I doubt Mr. Walling would have gone on TV to drink the water and tell Flint residents it was safe.
Is that true, Mr. Walling? Were you talked out of it? I mean, the memo comes out. You're getting inquiries from news organizations, the ACLU and others saying, hey, what are you doing about this? And you go on television and say it's safe.
And, I did trust the guidance that I was receiving, and that's what I regret in this, looking back. But I deliberately reached out. I asked the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs for a point of contact in the EPA. This is while the city of Flint was still under emergency manager, because I wanted to double check on what we were hearing from the state regulators. And when we're hearing essentially the same thing from the state and the federal regulators, then I relied on that information, and that's what I...
So what did the White House ask you to do? They asked you to communicate with who?
No, I asked the White House
for
a point of contact. And once
and the White House directed you to?
Dr. Susan Hedman.
And that's where, how long did it take before the EPA finally confirmed, came back and said, yeah, that Del Toro report is accurate? They didn't, did they? They never did. That's the point. You left office, you were there for months and months and months, and they never did come back and actually confirm it. Mr. Edwards, is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Hedman, you were in office, you were there being paid by taxpayers until January, late January of 2016. Why did it take you so long?
Mr. Dortoro's memo actually dealt with lead at one residence and 2 neighboring residences. And the conclusion of the final version of his memo was that the problem had been caused by physical disturbance of a lead service line, and that it was particular to that household.
Mr. Edwards, this was not a report about one house, was it?
Mr. Del Toro clearly pointed out that Flint was not being protected by federal corrosion control laws, period, and that the public health of an entire city was in danger.
This is where you're fundamentally and totally wrong, Ms. Hedman. And if you don't recognize that now, we're in mid-March 2016, and you still don't get it. You still don't get it, and neither does the EPA administrator. You screwed up, and you messed up people's lives.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Del Toro.
No. The audience, please, Ms. Hedman.
Mr. Del Toro was just one of several people at Region 5 who were concerned about the failure to implement corrosion control and had been communicating to MDEQ at higher and higher levels of EPA management.
This information was out there publicly. It had been released. You didn't like it, did you? Did Mr. Del Toro, if somebody released that report, did he do the right thing or not do the right thing?
I don't believe he released the report.
Okay,
but I think we need to be clear that there
Was that the right thing for that report to go public?
There were 3 reasons why EPA could not release that report.
Yeah, what are those?
The first is that it contained personally identifiable information, health information, and that kind of information is not something that we could release. And so before a report is released, that is typically redacted by our Office of Regional Counsel.
Okay, so a black pen would take
Right.
10 seconds or
Right.
so?
And
Okay, keep going.
Secondly, the material in the report included enforcement-sensitive information, and we do not release that to the targets or to the general public. Again, that would have been a redaction issue. And then additionally, there was data in the report that we neither collected nor analyzed, and it needed to go through a kind of standard QA/QC. I directed that that be done as soon as possible. It was my expectation that the report could be finalized and put in a form that could be publicly released before the reporter had to file his story. That was my expectation at the time.
And it took 7 months. Mr. Edwards, your reaction to her comments?
I'm just in disbelief.
My time is well expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.